It was spring of last year when I got bored in class and decided I needed a break. I excused myself, opened up my phone on the way to the bathroom, and it was there that I read some of the scariest words I've ever read in my entire life, written by my best friend. I'm hiding under my desk right now. They said there's someone in my school with a gun. Whatever happens, I love you. Whatever happens, I love you. I responded with immediate concern, asking Sam, what's happening? Are you alright? I walked around in a daze for the next couple of hours, thinking to myself, is that the last time I'll hear from him? Will he become just another name on the far too long list of names of those who have been victims of gun violence, of those who have died in Parkland and in Belmont and in Santa Fe, and every day in impoverished urban communities? Until finally, he told me that it was over. It was a false alarm. He had hid under his desk for 3 hours until they could confirm that there was no danger, until they could confirm that there was no gun. Still in shock, I began to search for a reason why there was ever a possibility of a gun in the first place. I thought, surely the American people realized the urgency of this issue. So I went looking, and found out that I was right. In October of 2016, according to Gallup, 61% of Americans support stricter gun laws. In the greatest democracy on earth, if almost 2/3 of the people support any given position, surely it should be reflected in our laws. So I checked another poll from August of 2019 and found that 63% of people support tighter restrictions. A different poll found that 89% of Americans want expanded background checks, and 75% favor an optional buyback program. I began to look at other topics, hoping that gun policy was an anomaly and that the people's views would be better represented on other subjects. But what I found just confirmed what I already feared. While 60% of Americans oppose a border wall, the current administration plans on building one. While 66% of Americans support the legalization of marijuana, it remains illegal at the federal level. And while 93% of Americans think people who are gay and lesbian should have the same job opportunities as heterosexual individuals, many states still allow discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. On a host of important topics, there is a pattern of ignoring the will of the American people. A study conducted by Northwestern and Princeton professors confirms this, with the two most important charts in American society. These charts show the percent of Americans that support a law compared to the likelihood that that law will be passed. Makes sense, right? In a real democracy, the chart would look something like this. You can see that there is a positive correlation. The greater the support, the greater the chance that a law will be passed. Okay, great. So this would be our ideal democracy. But the problem comes with the next chart. Here, the black line is almost horizontal, meaning that the preferences of these people mean little to nothing to our government. The difference between these two charts is the first measures the influence of the economic elite, while the second chart shows the influence of the average citizen. So this is our democracy. The study concludes that the average American has a non-significant, near-zero impact on public policy in the United States. Why? In our government, it takes a crazy amount of money in order to even compete in an election. Because the only people who can afford to give these exorbitant amounts of money are the wealthy, they're the ones who our representatives are indebted to. This power disparity, together with other institutional barriers, combine to create the issue at the root of every problem in our country. Our democracy doesn't work because our democracy doesn't work for all of us. In fact, it doesn't even work for a majority of us. The solution to this fundamental issue is simple. Give the average voter a voice. We can fix our democracy, but only by radically changing the way elections are run in this country. So let's start with the very first thing we need to fix. Before even officially declaring their candidacy, most candidates will make sure that they have some plausible path to victory. This means that they need to figure out where their money is coming from. This is when election season really starts. The unfortunate thing is that this crucial part of the electoral process only includes a minute portion of the American electorate, who are overwhelmingly white and wealthy. Many attempts have been made to curb the influence of the ultra-wealthy by limiting donations from corporations and special interests. Almost every attempt has been struck down by the courts as unconstitutional. Right now, wealthy individuals Corporations and organizations which contribute to political campaigns are the people who our representatives are indebted to. This includes only 0.47% of the American public, which gives more than $200 to candidates, political parties, or political action committees. This tiny elite, this 0.47%, contributes 71% of the total funding for these groups. This requires the political establishment to spend crazy amounts of time courting not even 0.5% of the American public. The typical congressperson spends more than half their time fundraising, and senators spend even more than that. Due to this, we have a vicious cycle where the top 1% donate money to politicians that in turn pass laws which help them to make more money, which they then use to effect more laws. The result is a government run by the rich. But if we can't outlaw donations from the elite, then how do we change our system? Former 2020 presidential candidate Andrew Yang said, "Money talks in this country. The problem is that speaking for the companies. You have to have the money speak for the people." So what if we did that? What if we had the money speak for the people? Well, we can do that with a plan called Democracy Dollars. The plan is simple. For federal elections, we give every U.S. citizen vouchers, which they can redeem when they want to donate to a political campaign. Everyone would now have the option to donate up to $200 to political campaigns. The catch? Only candidates who refuse donations of more than $200 will be eligible to receive this money. So now our politicians are forced to choose between the large dollar donations of the few and democracy dollars, between the elite and the people. In Seattle in 2015, voters decided to give democracy dollars a chance. The results were astounding. The number of small dollar donations more than tripled in just 2 years, and 84% of those participating in the voucher system had never before donated to a political campaign. Democracy dollars finally leveled the playing field. Now that we know it works, it's time for us to stand and fight for the same type of change in our own communities. It's time for a national democracy voucher system. These so-called democracy dollars are a good first step in reforming our democracy, but that's all it is, a first step. In addition to contributing massively to political campaigns, wealthy people also vote more often because of the institutional barriers in place which prevent many in vulnerable communities from voting. Factors such as voter ID laws, a lack of accessibility to voter registration, and a lack of time contribute to America's lackluster voter turnout. In fact, the United States ranked 26 out of 32 developed countries as voter turnout in our country rarely exceeds 60%. The difference between the US and other developed nations is that these other countries have policies in place which actively encourage voter turnout. Policies such as automatic voter registration, mail-in ballots, early voting, and making Election Day a national holiday would improve voter turnout in the United States, as these policies have been proven to do across the world. The data tells the truth. When you make voting more accessible, more people will vote. You shouldn't have to jump through hoops to vote. It should be easy. Let's turn now to the actual voting, where another problem awaits us. The 2000 presidential election was one of the closest in recent history, and an especially tumultuous moment in this election was when George Bush was declared the victor of Florida, and with it, the election. You can see here that Bush won Florida with less than 0.1%. He won by only 537 votes. But the most interesting thing is when you take a look at the percentages, you see that neither Gore or Bush won a majority of the vote. Both of the major party candidates combined only won about 98% of the vote. So where did this crucial 2% go? In a close race, when even the tiniest advantage can grant you victory, why is it that 2% of the vote seems to have gone missing? Well, that 2% voted mostly for a man named Ralph Nader. In 2000, he was the presidential nominee for the Green Party, who are closest in ideology with the Democratic Party, meaning that while these voters cast their ballot for Nader, a vast majority of them would have preferred a Democrat to a Republican. Now, simple math dictates that if these people's preferences had been taken into account, Gore would have won Florida, and with it the election. However, the preferences of these people were ignored, and the candidate who stood most fervently opposed to their ideals was in fact the victor of the election. This is what's called the spoiler effect, and it's the reason why so many people are no longer willing to risk their vote for a third-party candidate, so they're forced to choose between two candidates who don't actually share their values. This allows the two major parties to control the entirety of our political system, because they have the safety of being able to ignore huge chunks of voters while still reliably winning their votes. In order to win an election, you don't even need to be liked in our system. You can be hated. You just have to make sure that your opponent is even more hated. The system that we currently have in place is one that encourages the two major parties to negatively campaign because there are no other viable options. This is why we need to implement ranked choice voting, so that voters can rank the candidates in order of preference. This way, people can still vote their conscience, but if their candidate has the least amount of support, then all these people will then be counted towards their second choice. This happens as many times as are necessary until one candidate has a majority of the vote. A perfect example of this is the 2018 congressional election in Maine's 2nd District, where there were 4 main candidates. Using traditional voting, the Republican incumbent would have won with only 46.3% of the vote. But thanks to ranked choice voting, Jared Golden won the election because he was able to appeal to a broader base of supporters. With ranked choice voting in place, politicians can no longer afford to take your vote for granted. With ranked choice voting, everyone is heard. The reason why Florida was such a big deal in the 2000 election was because, despite Bush only winning by about 500 votes, he was able to win all of the state's 25 electoral college votes. This means that not one of the 2.9 million Floridians who voted for Gore had any effect on the outcome of the election. This happens in almost every state because the Electoral College works as a winner-take-all system where the loser's supporters are essentially ignored. The Electoral College perhaps has an even more dramatic effect in states that tend to consistently vote one way or the other, making it so that politicians only have to pay attention to a selection of swing states like Florida. The fact that this system essentially ignores those on the losing side of each state's election means that the votes of almost everyone outside these swing states don't matter. The result of this is that the Electoral College has allowed victories for candidates who lost the popular vote but won the Electoral College. In 1824, 1876, 1888, 2000, and 2016, the person elected president actually received less votes than their opponents. The Electoral College has acted as the middleman of our democracy for centuries. It's time we make our politicians deal directly with the American people and respect their wishes. This means abolishing the Electoral College. The person with the most votes should win. Why does the 4th grader realize this before the Harvard alums in Congress? So, we've solved the issue of wealth influencing our election by promoting democracy dollars. We've registered almost everyone to vote. We have modernized our voting system to increase turnout, and we have eliminated our unfair voter system by implementing ranked choice voting and abolishing the Electoral College. Unfortunately, even if we did all of this, it would still likely make very little difference in Congress. Why? Because almost every single congressional election is decided before one vote has even been cast. In 2018, only 50 congressional races were decided by less than a 5% margin. This means that out of 435 House races, only 50 of them were close. That's only 11% of House races. And it's not because voters loved the winning candidate. In fact, in November of 2018, 74% of people disapproved of Congress's job performance. So, if not the overwhelming popularity of Victor, what is the reason why nearly 89% of House races weren't competitive? The answer is gerrymandering. If you don't know what gerrymandering is, it's simple. Every congressperson is elected by a congressional district, and it's the process of dividing up states into these congressional districts where the problem lies. Gerrymandering is the practice of manipulating the boundaries of each district to give one party the upper hand in elections. If there are 50 people, and you know that 20 of them are going to vote red and the rest are going to vote blue, you can get tons of different results by splitting these people into their 5 congressional districts differently. Now, let's take a real example. In 2010, across the country, Republicans were in charge of redistricting. Then, in 2014, when 1.4 million more people voted for Democrats, Republicans held a more than 50-seat majority in Congress. This happens because the people who decide how to draw congressional districts are the same people who hold the power every 10 years when it comes time to redraw the districts. The result of this gerrymandering is obvious. The will of the people is subverted by the political establishment. This is done all across the country by both major parties. Gerrymandering is more than enough proof that politicians can't regulate themselves. A bipartisan commission of statisticians should be in control of redistricting because they're the experts on the topic and they won't allow any personal bias to sway their decision. These are things that definitely can't be said about politicians. The numbers should dictate redistricting, not personal biases. Right now, gerrymandering is not only legal, but prevalent in our society, and we need to eliminate it. Politicians shouldn't pick their voters. The voters should pick their politicians. The problem, unfortunately, isn't coming up with the solutions for these issues. The solutions already exist. The problem is implementing these new ideas. And the only way we can do that is with your help. All of the ideas I mentioned up here are meaningless without the people to act on them, and we've already seen how powerful such activism has been. In the past, the civil rights movement passed laws state by state to protect minority communities, and eventually, this led to federal laws that did the same for people across the nation. We need to do the same thing now to fix our democracy. There are organizations you can donate to or volunteer with that work tirelessly every day to promote a real democracy. You can even help just by sharing videos and talks like mine that spread awareness about the erosion of our basic rights. But most of all, for those of you over 18, the best thing you can do is spend a couple of minutes looking at candidates running for office near you and vote for the ones who favor democracy. Because even with all the obstacles in our way, if we all come together and unite behind change, if we pledge to protect democracy, we can still win. With your help, we can protect kids like me and my friend Sam, so that instead of composing our last words, we spend our time in school learning how to build a better world for all of us, where no kid has to hide under their desk for fear of a gun. Together, we can build on the progress that's already been made in Maine, where ranked choice voting is in effect, and in Seattle, where democracy dollars has had such a massive effect. Together, we can stand tall and proud for democracy, and we can fight for our rights. We must move forward together. We must vote together. And if we do all this, we will win together.